This obsessive ex-girlfriend really had crazy trouble getting over her last boyfriend. These crazy vegans wouldn't stop harassing this vet until they followed their orders. This lady decided to just be nasty for no apparent reason. And finally, this doctor loved to lace his, let's just call it happy guy, with an extra kick, and it finally caught up to him. Who are the worst people we need to kick out of society? Let's find out, starting with number 6, the Insanely Obsessive Ex. Kiera Mack sent her ex-boyfriend a text saying that his life was over and that she had a book of plans to make sure of it. This came after months of stalking, vandalizing his car, and even going after him outside his home. She knew where he lived, worked, and spent his time. She even posted intimate photos of him on Instagram just to make him panic. She was eventually arrested and went to court, where she walked away with basically no consequences. Mac's behavior wasn't a minor outburst. It was a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. She spray painted cheater on her ex's car, stalked him across social media, and sent messages that sounded like something out of a horror movie, detailing that she knew where he lived, worked, and even the code to his house. She took things even further by posting intimate photos of him, pretending they were public to make him panic. He moved to escape the harassment, but that wasn't enough. She tracked him down, showed up at his new home, and went after him. And she even hit him with a shoe. But that still wasn't enough. Later, she sent him another threatening message, making it clear she wasn't done, and warning that she had an entire plan mapped out to ruin his life. At that point, the law finally got involved. Mac was arrested in her pajamas and brought in for questioning. When asked about her getting physical, she downplayed it, saying her ex-boyfriend played soccer and often had scratches. She claimed she wasn't sure if there had even been physical contact. After her release, she was left to walk 20 minutes in her pajamas to her victim's parents' house to call for an Uber. Mac's repeated harassment resulted in a 15-month community corrections order, a $1,000 fine, and no conviction. The court acknowledged the seriousness of her actions, but took her mental health struggles into account. Mental health challenges can contribute to destructive behavior, but they don't erase the harm done. Many people struggle with anxiety, depression, or personality disorders without going out of their way to mess with other people. The question isn't whether mental health should be considered in legal decisions. It should, but whether it should overshadow the impact on victims. Stalking and harassment should have real consequences. Mac's ex-boyfriend didn't want her arrested. He wanted her to get help. But when someone's behavior keeps escalating, the legal system has to step in. Ultimately, what needs to be kicked out of society is that mental health issues are a factor, not an excuse. Number 5, the insane vegan activists. Tash Peterson is a vegan activist, known more for her aggressive antics than any meaningful contribution to the discussion of animal rights. In her latest escapade, she stormed a veterinary clinic, accused the owner of eating her patients, then spread bizarre claims online, all of which landed her with a nearly $200,000 penalty for defamation. In Peterson's latest escapade, she went to a veterinary clinic in Perth, Australia, where she and her partner, Jack Higgs, saw 2 well-cared-for cockatiels outside in a cage and immediately decided that this was an immoral act and that she somehow compared to slavery. So, without hesitation, they stormed into the clinic, videoing themselves as they berated the staff and accused the veterinarian, Dr. Kay McIntosh, of eating her own patients. But this wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. It was a calculated move designed to generate clicks and engagement on social media. Despite repeated requests to leave, Peterson and Higgs refused, only finally doing so when the police arrived. The damage, however, was already done. The absurd video spread rapidly online, stressing out McIntosh and her husband and inviting other vegan activists to scrutinize their veterinary practice. Peterson's history of activism is less activism and more of a pattern of attention-seeking nonsense. She often performs her stunts in, let's just call it, not much clothing, in order to amplify her message. And while animal rights advocacy is a legitimate cause, Peterson's approach lacks any sort of reasoned attempt to change anyone's mind, and instead seems to be more about provocation and being a weird nuisance. The consequences of her behaviors have extended beyond online controversy. She has been arrested multiple times, lost her ability to work as a lifeguard and swimming instructor due to her criminal record, and now sustains herself financially through 2 OnlyFans accounts, earning nearly $250,000 in a year. Because, of course, she has a couple OnlyFans accounts. Look, we love animals, and animal rights are a worthy thing to care about. And we do acknowledge that there's a bit of cognitive dissonance between caring about animal welfare and eating them. Regardless of your stance on using animal products, whether you care or don't care, we can all agree that animals being mistreated is wrong, and it's a legit cause to rally against. But Peterson's actions don't champion animal welfare. They create hostility, spread misinformation, and damage reputations, and seem to be more self-serving than anything. Even the judge who ruled against her acknowledged that her feigned innocence was entirely disingenuous. She isn't a misunderstood activist fighting for a noble cause. She's just an opportunist who will do anything for clicks. Society doesn't benefit from people who prioritize personal gain over all else, including dragging innocent bystanders into their chaos for the sake of attention. Worse yet, stunts like Peterson's only serve to discredit legitimate activism, making it harder for those who genuinely fight for animal welfare to be taken seriously. Peterson and her ilk contribute nothing but disorder, and society would be better off without their toxic presence. Number 4. The nasty fellow passenger. A routine flight turned ugly when a woman unleashed a racist tirade on an Indian American family, harassing an 11-year-old boy and berating his father in front of everyone. What started as a minor interaction escalated into a full-blown confrontation after landing in Los Angeles, with the woman blasting out insults and refusing to back down, even as bystanders and airline staff stepped in. Pervez Tafik, a high-end wedding photographer, was just trying to get home with his wife and 3 kids when this crazy lady, who he said was clearly drunk, decided to start harassing them. It started on the plane when she allegedly questioned his 11-year-old son about whether he was Indian and where he was from. Then, after they landed in Los Angeles and boarded the shuttle bus, she turned up the hostility, yelling racist insults and accusing Tafik's family of having no respect and pushing people around. When called out, she pulled the classic move of accusing him of being racist, as if that would somehow change everyone's mind. The whole thing played out in front of other passengers who backed up Tafik's account and called her out for instigating the situation. Eventually, United Airlines staff had to remove her from the bus, but not before she made sure to leave a lasting impression of just how awful she was. So, we're not exactly sure what the goal was here, because it seems like this lady was just looking for an excuse to be hateful. She wasn't being threatened. She wasn't in danger. She apparently just had a deep-seated need to make someone else's day miserable. People like this don't contribute anything but negativity. They don't make the world better. They just make it more exhausting. If you're the type of person who gets racist when they get drunk, and you then decide to drink on a plane and harass a kid, you don't need to be a part of society. Get off the bus, off the flight, and out of public spaces where people are just trying to live their lives. There's no room for this nonsense anymore. Number 3, the uncaring mother. A 16-month-old child was found hanging his head out of a broken window, alone, in an apartment with a couple of dogs. And where was his mother? Reese Louise Myers. She was miles away in San Antonio, meeting some dude she met on Hinge. Police in Killeen, Texas, found Myers' 16-month-old child hanging out of a broken window, half-dressed, dirty, and completely alone, except for 2 dogs who were described as being protective of him in an aggressive way. Meanwhile, Myers was in San Antonio, meeting some guy from Hinge, because why wouldn't she be? This wasn't just a bad decision. It was a complete disregard for the safety of her child that could have had some pretty permanent consequences. She tried to cover her tracks, claiming she hired a babysitter through Facebook, but the last time that babysitter even spoke to her was over a year before this all happened. When police pressed further, another woman came forward, saying Myers had a habit of abandoning her child overnight. The worst part? She even set up the apartment like some kind of baby prison, blocking doors, locking windows, and throwing up a baby gate so she could leave the kid alone without supervision. That's not planning, that's premeditated neglect. Myers was arrested, but that doesn't undo the suffering she inflicted on her own child. A responsible parent doesn't gamble their child's safety for a random hookup. And society doesn't need people like this. Children don't ask to be born, and they certainly don't deserve to be tossed aside because their mother wants to swipe right. This kind of selfishness isn't just criminal, it's inexcusable. There's no place for people like this in a functioning society. Number 2, the inattentive mom. In Georgia, a mother named Brittany Patterson faced possible jail time for doing something that, just a couple of decades ago, wouldn't have even raised an eyebrow, letting her 10-year-old son walk less than a mile alone. Now, unless she agrees to a safety plan, she could end up doing time. Brittany was out taking another child to a doctor's appointment. Her son, Soren, had been outside before she left, but she didn't know exactly where he was. He was going to go with her, but since he wasn't back in time, she just left to go to the appointment without him. Their home sits on 16 acres in a small town of just 370 people, surrounded by woods where Soren often plays, so him just being out wasn't unusual. His grandmother and aunts lived just a couple of minutes away, and with so much family around, so Brittany assumed she was either outside or visiting a relative. But instead, Soren had decided to take a walk to town, which is less than a mile away. The road he took has a speed limit of 25 to 35 miles per hour in different areas, but it's not known for being particularly dangerous. A woman saw him walking alone, and after asking if he was okay, which he was, decided to call the police. But rather than simply checking in and sending him home, deputies picked Soren up, drove him back, and later returned to arrest Brittany in front of her other children for reckless conduct. Authorities offered to drop the charges if Brittany agreed to sign a legally binding safety plan, which included installing a GPS tracker on Soren's phone and designating a safety person to supervise her children whenever she wasn't home. A caseworker from the Division of Family and Children Services visited her house, conducted interviews, and ultimately told Brittany that everything seemed fine. Brittany refused to sign, arguing that agreeing to the plan would mean admitting she had put her son in danger, something she didn't believe was true. She also didn't want to be forced into tracking her child's every move, feeling it was unnecessary given their rural lifestyle and close-knit family. Despite the DFCS caseworker's assurance that nothing seemed wrong, prosecutors insisted that if she didn't sign the plan, they could move forward with reckless conduct charges, leaving her facing a potential $1,000 fine and up to a year in jail. As of the release of this video, she's still fighting the charges. So, who do you think is wrong here? On one hand, Soren was 10 at the time and had access to a cell phone. If he's capable of using it, which he was, he's probably old enough to be on his own in a limited capacity. He probably shouldn't have been walking into town, but it seems like him just being out playing or being left home alone would be fine. And if that's something he did often, it wouldn't be cause for concern. But on the other hand, it's weird that Brittany doesn't want to put a GPS tracker on his phone. She said that at the time, she didn't know where he was, which wasn't the right answer. And the fact that she's that resistant to a pretty non-intrusive way to keep an eye on her son is also weird. Even if he's mature for his age, many things can happen that 10-year-olds are incapable of dealing with. He's also walking into town without telling her, and that was apparently not something he normally did. So she should know where her minor children are at all times, point blank. And if she doesn't, that's problematic. So does Brittany deserve the boot? Was she reckless, or was she right, and this is a big nothing burger? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Number 1, the terrible German doctor. Dr. Andreas Niederbickler, a German surgeon, thought that a great idea for a romantic evening involved secretly lacing his private parts with some nose beers before engaging in some mouth stuff. You get the idea. The result ended up with her not making it, and Dr. Niederbickler refused to take any accountability at all, since he never secretly dosed anyone without their consent. Back in 2018, Niederbickler was living the high life, pun intended, when he decided to dose his lover, a woman known only as Yvonne M., without her knowledge. But he gave her too much, and she collapsed from an overdose. Tragically, despite his medical efforts to resuscitate her, she didn't survive. The thing was, this wasn't some one-time thing. Investigators found that he had also secretly dosed at least 3 other women, slipping some nose beers into their champagne glasses, lipstick, and even somehow toothpaste. All of which is just, why? Regardless, this guy seriously went the extra mile, because that sounds like a lot of work for such a weird way to secretly dose someone. Maybe it's because we're not in that world, so it's super weird to us, but if you're some sociopathic doctor with a taste for nose beers, you're like, yeah, load the toothpaste up. Makes sense. Anyway, Niederbickler, however, bizarrely insisted that his partners knew they were getting into. His argument? That Yvonne was an experienced user and his other victims were fully aware of what was happening as well. However, the court didn't buy it. Since he was lacing all sorts of weird stuff around his house, why do that if they all knew what they were getting into, right? So he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Yet somehow, this is the kind of guy who still thinks he deserves a second chance. Even after being convicted, Niederbickler refused to compensate Yvonne's family for funeral costs, pushing her grieving husband and son, yeah, she was married and had a kid, which makes this even more of a gut punch, into a legal battle to just get some level of restitution. A judge had to force him to pay £11,500 for emergency care Yvonne received before she passed away, plus thousands more to her family. What makes Niederbickler truly disturbing isn't just the crime itself, it's his complete lack of remorse. As of the release of this video, he's still fighting the ruling, and still claiming he's the real victim here. Some people make mistakes. Others make life-ending choices and then refuse to acknowledge them. Niederbickler belongs in the latter category, the type we should collectively kick out, preferably with the force of 1,000 boots. Click to watch one of these next videos.